Hello, crypto boys and ghouls, and welcome back to the channel, Tales from the Cryptmancer, where we feature content on play-to-earn games on the blockchain, such as Splinterlands. And in today's video, I wanted to do a little bit of Splinterlands trivia, talking about an interesting fact that you may not know or may not realize, and what it means for the long-term value of SPS as a token in Splinterlands. And specifically, the topic for today that I want to talk about is, what is the biggest DEC sink in the Splinterlands game mechanics? Now, I think a lot of people are certainly aware of guilds, and guilds burn DEC through this kind of mechanism here, which is an outline of the guild buildings DEC sink in Splinterlands. Now, each guild can have 5 buildings, and each building can go from level 1 to level 10. And the amount of DEC varies on how much you have to burn to get to those higher guild building levels. And I'm going to just give you a little secret here. If you were to take a single guild building from level 1 to level 10, it would actually cost 4.21 million DEC. And just park that little bit of data there for a moment, and let's talk about one other piece of data. And that data is in regards to land. There are actually, from a land perspective, 150,000 plots of land that have been sold and dispersed to asset holders in Splinterlands right now. Now, those land plots are not able to be used in the game currently, but keep in mind, on those 150,000 plots of land, there's going to be the option to put a building, at least one building. I don't know if there'll be more, but let's just say for now, for the sake of argument, one building for every plot of land that a landowner owns. A little bit of a tongue twister there. So when you think about that, and let's just assume for now that a building upgrade from a DEC perspective would follow the same model as the guild building upgrades, taking a building on a plot of land from the lowest level of 1 to the max level of 10. Let's just say it would follow this mechanism, and it would take 4.21 million DEC per plot of land to take that building to the max level. What does that mean for the game? Well, it actually means that when you take 150,000 plots of land, the maximum DEC burn in the world of Splinterlands would be 631.5 billion with a B DEC that would be potentially burned at its max capacity. And you're probably wondering, well, why would anyone want to max a building on a plot of land? Well, what has been alluded to in the documentation for land is that land buildings will provide different functions to store materials, to increase production of materials, or increase production of crafting of items. So the whole building piece of land is deeply entwined within the land game mechanics. And remember, the whole part of this land ecosystem is the ability for land to produce materials that can be crafted and created items, which are NFTs, which can be sold. So there's an economy built around land plots. So if you're a landowner, it's going to be definitely worth your time and attention to invest DEC into those land buildings on your land plots to increase your land production, which means, well, more profitability and more revenue and income for you as a landowner. So that's an interesting piece there. And that's interesting because when you compare it to guilds, there's certainly guilds that play at different levels where a level 2 barracks or a level 2 arena or a level 2 store at maybe a total investment of 30,000 DEC is fine, and they don't need to go any higher for a period of time. Maybe it doesn't make sense to go up into the higher levels and pay higher and more DEC. So that is one difference between guilds and land plots and landowners. But let's just talk a little bit about the guilds and the DEC sinks involved with guilds. In comparison, in the game right now, there are currently 1,482 guilds. Now, each guild could have, actually has 5 buildings that can be maxed in a guild. And if you do the math and you take 4.21 million DEC times 5 buildings per guild times 1,482 guilds, well, you get a total maximum burn of DEC at 31.196 billion DEC. And when you compare that to the 631.5 billion that can be burned on land plots, that is actually 20 times more DEC that would be potentially burned via land plot buildings. So that's pretty impressive as a number goes. And yes, I know that guilds are not capped like land is. For example, land is capped at 150,000. Certainly, it's likely that there will be more than 1,482 guilds in Splinterlands in the foreseeable future. But remember that currently with 1,482 guilds, that's enough guild spots for 22,320 humans, given a level 1 guild hall. Now, we certainly know that there are guild halls that have more than a level 1, but let's just say for the sake of argument that it's capped at 22,000 human players in the current number of guilds right now. So that's more than adequate given the current player base at this point in time. In fact, a lot of guilds are having challenges recruiting real players into guilds. And for guilds to catch up as a DEC sink, you'd have to basically 20x the amount of guilds in the game today. And that would mean there'd be enough guild spaces for a minimum of 444,600 human players. And I certainly look forward to the day in the game where we get to that kind of a daily active users, where all of those are active human players in the game, brawling in guilds and wanting guild buildings upgraded. But if we go back to the numbers here of why, again, land is the biggest potential DEC sink, let's look at what that means. If we go to Peak Monsters and we look at the DEC data from the Peak Monsters top holders dashboard, what do we see here for DEC? Well, we see here the DEC in the ecosystem, at least for Hive, that Peak Monsters is tracking, including in the liquidity pools and other accounts, is actually 6.249 billion DEC. Now, it doesn't necessarily probably include DEC that's off-chain, like on Binance or Ethereum chains. But for the sake of argument, let's just say this is the majority of DEC that we're having to deal with in the crypto markets. 6.247 DEC, or excuse me, 6.247 billion DEC versus the potential burn of 631.5 billion DEC through land plots. And yes, that's a maximum number that we're talking about there. That means that's 100 times more DEC potentially to be burned than currently Peak Monsters is tracking here in accounts and wallets in the Hive ecosystem. So that's crazy to think about that. And why does it all matter when it comes to SPS? Well, it matters because when Math and Aggroed announced earlier this year the intent to have a DEC mechanism to keep DEC at its peg at 0.001 DEC per dollar by burning SPS and creating an arbitrage opportunity, that's a big deal. Because right now, yes, I understand DEC is below peg and there's no need to burn SPS to create more DEC, but there are a number of factors to consider here. One, soon, once SPS ranked rewards are introduced, there'll be no more DEC minted daily for battle rewards. So that DEC will become certainly scarcer as far as minting of DEC. In fact, the only way DEC will be minted moving forward would be through the liquidity pool rewards for DEC liquidity pools or through the burning of SPS. And if you have a pressure of DEC burns coming from guild buildings and in the future land buildings in great quantities, that's going to push the DEC value up to, well, 2 peg and probably past peg. And what does that mean once it gets past the peg of 0.001? Well, once it gets past that peg value, there's an arbitrage opportunity where you can burn an equal amount of SPS, $1 of SPS to get a dollar worth of DEC at peg, which is basically going to allow you to exchange that extra DEC and keep the profits. So that kind of SPS burn will in turn take any value of DEC above peg and get it close to peg, if not at or below. So what does that mean in the grand scheme of things? Well, as DEC is burned and that value goes up, SPS in turn would be burned and become more scarce, which would mean increased value for SPS over time. And when we're talking about these kind of numbers, again, 100 times more DEC than is currently printed could potentially be burned by landowners to increase their buildings if this model was potentially used. That's a crazy DEC sink, and that's not even talking about the guild buildings or other future sinks for DEC in Splinterlands. So again, what does this mean? Well, it means that the long-term price appreciation for SPS, when you take everything out of the picture and just look at DEC and say, hey, don't look at the ecosystem, don't look at utility for SPS, don't look at nodes, don't look at future games, etc. Just look at the DEC piece of this puzzle. Well, that is obviously a positive factor to consider. So if you needed a little pre-town hall announcement, inspiration or cheerleading for SPS and the potential price appreciation there in the future, well, maybe you got some this morning from this video. Let's see what is announced later on today in the town hall. And let me know in the comments below, how's your journey thus far with Land Ben? What are your near-term plans for DEC and SPS? And I'd be curious to hear about your journey in Splinterlands and where you think we're going moving forward. Until next time, keep stacking those stats.
That's entertainment.